I'm Jared, and I'm going to show you how to get started using the Ruby SDK for OneView. To get going, let's just go to the GitHub page, scroll down, and find the installation command, which we can run, and in a few seconds we have it installed. It comes with classes and modules and methods that you can use in a Ruby code natively, and it also comes with a command line interface that gets installed into your Ruby gems bin directory. So first thing we're going to do is use that new command line interface to test our login to our OneView instance. Great. Since we provided some environment variables, which the GitHub page talks about right here, since we've provided those environment variables, the SDK is able to default some things in its client creation and go ahead and connect to our OneView instance, which we have here. So we can do a lot of different things here, but we're just going to kind of try out a couple of the different commands that the OneView SDK command line interface has. So we can run help to get an overview of what all it can do, and we're going to go ahead and run a couple of these. So the first thing is just to list our server profiles, and we have 0. So let's list something that we actually have something of. You can see over on the left we have one server profile template, and when we do this list here, that also appears. How about server hardware? Great, we have a total of 66 of those, but we have so many of them, maybe let's do a little bit of filtering on those to get exactly what we want. So if we do OneView SDK Ruby, and let's do, well actually let's do a show. And let's just pick any old bay here, paste it in, and this is going to give us the complete details for that server hardware resource. So we can see a variety of different things, including, let's see, there's a short model name here. We can get, there's a serial number in there somewhere, a URI to be able to get to it programmatically, and a bunch of different things as well. There's a lot in here about the hardware. But let's go ahead and use that short model name to do some filtering and get all the other server hardware like it. So we're going to use the search command and filter out short model. And let's just go ahead and copy that so we don't get anything wrong. And run that. We can see that there are 4, and let's just go ahead and get the serial numbers for each of those. Great. So a little demonstration of just kind of some of the different things you can do with searching, listing, and showing different resources. Obviously server hardware is not the only one that you can do there. Basically anything that you can see in OneView you can also do with the command line interface, which messes bunches in this next topic actually. So there's a command here called SCMB, and that stands for State Change Message Bus. And when we just go ahead and run this, by default, it's going to just connect to this message bus and listen to anything that OneView sends it. So for any different resource type, you can see here that after just a couple seconds, we have events coming in and they'll be printed out. So in this case, a task was completed. And before that, there was a task that was running. So you know, that's a little bit too broad. Usually we want something a little bit more granular to be able to really just take actions or listen to certain events. And so that command also gives us the option to specify a route, and we can say SCMB, and then we can kind of filter as we go here. So let's just go for server hardware again. See. And let's listen to all events for server hardware. Just like that. Oh, I forgot an equal sign. All right. And so if we go back over to some server hardware, just to test out that this is working, let's go ahead and power on one of them. You can see here that we got an event. And if we go ahead and power it back off, it's hard to see there, but we did get another event where the new substate is off, right? Okay, well that pretty well does it for the command line. Obviously a lot more there, but this is just a quick overview. So for an SDK, what you're probably going to want to use most of is, like I mentioned, the classes, the modules, and the different methods that make it easy to interact with. It's a Ruby SDK, so in Ruby. So let's go ahead and load up. We're going to do basically just load up an interactive Ruby console. The SDK makes it pretty easy just to load one up with a client object available to you. So it's already created a client object for me based on those environment variables that we set. So if we do a couple things here, let's first just get the client API version. Okay, and we can see that we're running on API version 600. The client actually may have a higher maximum API version, but this is what the SDK is using. So when we send a request over the API, it's specifying the version as 600. So the first thing that let's do is what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a server profile based on that server profile template. Currently we don't have any, so we're going to create one. First, let's get the templates. Get all, and let's specify profile templates. All right, and so if we clear that out and we show templates.count, we have one, as we see on the left. And let's set template object equal to templates.first. Okay, so here's our template object, and you can see the type up here. It is a API 600 version server profile template. It has a client attached to it with some data there, but what we're really interested in is the data object, the data section of the object here. You can see it has a type, it has a name, and basically anything that you would see over here in the GUI, you're going to get here. All the data is contained within this data property. So let's go ahead and do something with that template. Let's create a new profile based on it. So profile, actually let's clear this first, equals template.new profile. And let's give this profile a name. Oops, I spelled that wrong. Okay, so now we have a new server profile object, and if we were to find the some of the details, you can see it basically copied the server profile template, and so the server profile template is listed as a data object, and it also is copied in things like the hardware type for the server profile template, the enclosure group, which we see over here on the GUI as well. So, and the only difference basically is we have a name on it and maybe some other attributes that a server profile has that a template does not. So let's go ahead and then attach some hardware to this profile. So let's go ahead and get all the hardware that matches. And we can do that by doing profile dot get available hardware. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at how many we got. 8. So 8 server hardware match this profile that are available. So let's just go ahead and set an object called h equal to the first one that matches. All right, and again, a new hardware type, object type of server hardware. We can see that we've selected enclosure 31 bay 3. Alrighty. So the last thing that we need to do here is say profile dot set server hardware and give it our new hardware object. It's going to go ahead and assign that. So when we do profile and look for a certain attribute, I think it's server hardware URI. Yep, so it set that to the hardware's URI. That's how it knows to use it. And the final step here is to say profile.create. And so this is actually going to kick off a task in OneView to go ahead and create that server profile. Probably too late to see it spinning here. Oh, okay, so it is still creating. It's going to take just a few seconds, and then we're going to have a server profile. This one doesn't have a whole lot of interesting details in it. We could have done a whole lot of different things, including adding some different connections and storage, setting the BIOS, setting the firmware, or customizing things, but we just took the template as is and used it. So really with just a couple commands, we were able to create a server profile pretty easy. The next steps would be to go ahead and obviously power the server on. If we were wanting to lay down an operating system on it, we would probably do something specific to your organization, whether that be integrating with an IPAM service or DNS, or giving one of the server profile's virtual MAC addresses to a Pixie server so that when it boots up, it has the operating system installed over the network. And of course, HPE Synergy offers a great way to lay down an OS that has no competition in terms of speed, but you obviously have by no means have to use it. You can install the OS however you do currently. So if we wanted to, we could say h.power, and we can either get it on or off. If we say off, it's going to return true because it's already in the off state. So this was all ran kind of in a little bit different way than you're typically going to develop, right? We were in an interactive Ruby console running some different commands to show the feedback instantly, but that's typically not how you're going to do things, right? You either have a script or some sort of program that's going to be running this code, and so what we were typing was Ruby, and if we were to do something comparable, we could do it in a Ruby script. For example, one we have here already made. We basically require the SDK, we create a client, and then we do what we did over the command line in just a few short commands here. We find a template. In this case, we're finding it by a specific name. We're creating a profile, attaching the hardware, and saying create. Again, before you power it on, you probably have some custom business logic that you need to do here in order to get it ready so that when it powers on, it's going to be booting up into an OS and attaching to your environment as you want it to. Okay, so jumping back to the message bus. So it's the OneView state change message bus, or the SCMB, and it's a really useful tool to be able to react to events that happen in your infrastructure. For example, you may want to take action if a server has a critical failure, or automatically update an inventory when a server is added or removed. So with the Ruby SDK, it's easy to connect to the SCMB and take actions on events as we showed. So instead of using the command line, which just prints them out, let's go ahead and take a look at an example script that does something with these events. So again, we require the SDK, we create a client, and then we create a new connection to the message bus and a queue that subscribes to a particular um, set of messages. And so in this case, we're doing the same one that we were before. We're listening to all server hardware events. And in this case, we're just going to, for each message that comes in, we're going to parse the data, which is JSON, and we're going to print out that the server hardware, we're going to print out what change type it had, and also the new substate. So let's go ahead and kick this off. So we just run Ruby SCMB server hardware, and it's going to connect in and listen. And so if we go over to our server hardware, we can pick one and power it on. And you can see instantly here we have a couple different messages. The first one was that it was powering on, and then the second one was that it was on. This is in a OneView simulator, so it's a little faster than it might be in your environment. Similarly, if we go on and power it off, you can see a couple new messages pop up for those events as well. If we look at our script again, we're not doing anything very complex here, but there's a lot of data that gets returned back in the event payload, and we're only displaying a couple of them here, but in reality, you're probably going to want to do something a little bit more advanced with that. Again, so we mentioned some of the use cases for if your server hardware enters a bad state or something is added or removed from OneView or from your data center, then you can actually take whatever action is that you want from that, whether that be updating an inventory, or we've had examples of customers when they put in a new server, they want it to be automatically detected, added to inventory, a firmware installed on it, and basically it added to a pool of resources for their internal provisioning process. So there's a lot of powerful things that you can do with this. And what we've talked about again is just kind of the skimming the surface of what you can do. But if something isn't possible with the built-in classes or the helper methods, like the server hardware power on method, right? We're just making an API call, and so you can do a lot of other things that the SDK doesn't necessarily provide. Anything that the GUI does, actually, the SDK does as well. So let me find this section in the README here for, not custom logging, but custom requests. So again, anything that the GUI does, it does over the API. And so the API is your one-stop shop for doing anything that you can do in your OneView environment. And if the SDK doesn't provide a class or a helper method to do it in kind of a simplified way, it's still easy to do with just making a custom REST API request. So that said, there are a lot of examples that we provide in the SDK. I would encourage you just to kind of read through the README, and then if you're looking to get started with something specific, check out the examples folder. If we expand this a little bit, you can see that there's kind of some documentation about how to get going, again, setting up a client so that all the examples work. And then there are a ton of examples, probably start with the shared examples of things that you can do for each different resource type. So for a familiar one that we've been working with, let's look at server profiles, and you can see there's a lot of comments in there, hopefully kind of helping explain what's going on, but it goes through how to create a basic server profile, how to create a server profile from a template, how to list them, how to update a server profile, update the name. And then it finally actually goes through, and so when you run this, this is a runnable script. It's going to go ahead and do a bunch of things like create a bunch of server profiles and then delete them for cleanup. So pretty full life cycle of what you can do with this object. There's a lot more, and so for each different object. There's also some good documentation about how to use those classes. You can look up a specific class and see all the different methods available to it and the documentation for each of them. So, hope you've enjoyed it. Just a quick rundown of the Ruby SDK. We'd love to work with you on this. If you have any issues with it, it's easy to go ahead and create a GitHub issue to ask questions. We'll be glad to answer those. So, thanks.